The massive crystalline dome of the Galactic Council chamber stretched endlessly upward, its translucent walls pulsing with patterns of light that seemed to respond to the collective thoughts of the assembled beings. Captain David Stone stood at the center of the vast space, surrounded by representatives from over 300 alien species. Each delegate sat in floating pods that adjusted to their unique physiological needs, creating a symphony of shapes and colors that defied human comprehension. The silence was deafening. For the first time in recorded galactic history, a species was being summoned to answer for charges of cosmic genocide, and that species was humanity. High Arbiter Vexhai loomed above the assembly, her serpentine form coiled around a floating platform that sparkled with neural interfaces. Her three heads moved independently, each set of eyes focused on a different aspect of the proceedings. When she spoke, her voice resonated through translation matrices that converted her words into comprehensible language for each species present. Captain David Stone of the species designated as Homo sapiens, she began, her tone carrying the weight of millennia of judicial authority. You stand before this council charged with the complete annihilation of the Mordak Collective. 17 star systems, 43 billion sentient beings, all reduced to cosmic dust in the span of 6 standard hours. David remained motionless, his hands clasped behind his back in military attention. His blue uniform seemed almost quaint, compared to the exotic technologies and bioengineered forms surrounding him. Yet there was something in his stillness that made several of the nearest delegates shift uncomfortably in their pods. How do you answer these charges? Vexhai demanded. The chamber held its breath. Some delegates leaned forward in anticipation. Others activated recording devices to capture what many believed would be humanity's final words as a free species. The Mordak Collective had been ancient when most current civilizations were still learning to use fire. Their military might have been legendary. The idea that a single human ship could destroy them was beyond impossible. David finally looked up, his gaze sweeping across the assembled representatives with calm confidence. Your Honor, I plead not guilty by reason of justified response. A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the chamber. The translation matrices sparked with overload as dozens of species simultaneously expressed outrage in their native languages. Several delegates rose from their pods, appendages waving in agitation. Justified response? Counselor Thex, a massive crystalline being whose body refracted light into rainbow patterns, resonated with disbelief. You claim that genocide was justified? David's expression remained unchanged. I claim that the Mordak Collective initiated hostilities against a peaceful human exploration vessel. Under both human law and the Galactic Convention of Protected Species, we had the right to defend ourselves. By destroying entire star systems? High Arbiter Vexhai's middle head swayed closer, her eyes narrowing to slits. Your ship logs show no distress calls, no request for assistance, no communication with any authority before your defensive action. That's correct, David agreed simply. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted accusations in languages that translated into concepts of madness, barbarism, and cosmic horror. Energy fields flickered around some of the more aggressive species as they struggled to contain their fury. The crystalline walls of the chamber began to pulse more rapidly, responding to the emotional chaos. Vexhai raised one of her massive hands and silence fell instantly. You admit to acting without provocation, without warning, without any attempt at peaceful resolution? No, Your Honor. David's voice cut through the tension like a blade. I admit to responding proportionally to an unprovoked attack on human vessels. The Mordak Collective fired first. They chose to treat us as enemies. They learned the consequences of that choice. Proportionally, the word came from Ambassador Kalara, whose ethereal form flickered between visible and translucent. You call the extinction of an entire civilization proportional? David turned to face her directly, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes that made the ancient ambassador step back. Ambassador Kalara, your species has been observing galactic politics for over 50,000 years. In all that time, how many species have successfully defended themselves against Mordak aggression? Kalara's form solidified as she considered the question. The Mordak Collective They were known for their military superiority. No species successfully resisted them once they declared intent to conquer. And how many species tried? Hundreds, she whispered, realization dawning in her multifaceted consciousness. David nodded. Hundreds of species. trillions of beings, all conquered, enslaved, or eliminated by the Mordak Collective over the course of millennia. And in 6 hours that threat was permanently removed from the galaxy. He paused, letting his words sink in. You call it genocide. I call it pest control. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not the quiet of anticipation, but the hush of beings suddenly confronted with a perspective they had never considered. For millennia, the Mordak Collective had been a fact of galactic life like gravity or entropy. Species planned around them, avoided them, appeased them, but never truly opposed them. Until now. Counselor Yeth, whose insectoid form clicked nervously, finally spoke. Captain Stone, the technology required to destroy star systems in hours would require energy outputs beyond anything known to galactic science. How is such a thing possible? David smiled for the first time since entering the chamber, and that smile sent chills through beings who had never experienced cold. Counselor Yeth, has this council ever wondered why humanity has only recently achieved interstellar travel, despite clear evidence that our species possesses advanced cognitive capabilities? Your species was geographically isolated, HFY stated, though uncertainty crept into her voice. Standard evolutionary development patterns. Wrong. David's voice carried a finality that made the chamber's walls pulse brighter. Humanity was quarantined. By ourselves. We've been space-capable for over 12,000 years. We've been monitoring galactic civilization for millennia. We chose to remain hidden until we were certain we could control ourselves. The implications hit the assembly like a shockwave. High Arbiter HFY's 3 heads moved in perfect synchronization as she processed this revelation. Control yourselves from what? David's smile widened, and for the first time since the proceedings began, genuine fear began to spread through the chamber. From doing exactly what we did to the Mordak Collective. You see, Your Honors, the reason this trial is fundamentally flawed is simple. You're operating under the assumption that humanity is the defendant here. He gestured to the assembled delegates, his movement encompassing the entire chamber. But every species in this room has known about the Mordak Collective's atrocities for thousands of years. You've all witnessed their conquests, their enslavements, their genocides, and none of you ever acted to stop them. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. That makes all of you accomplices to genocide on a galactic scale. David continued, his voice growing stronger. So no, Your Honors, I am not the one on trial here. You are. As if responding to his words, the very walls of the chamber began to shift, and delegates noticed for the first time that the exit doors had sealed themselves. The trial had become something far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. In the distance, barely perceptible to most of the assembled beings, space itself began to ripple as ships of impossible design approached the council station. Humanity had come to collect their representative, and they were bringing reinforcements that would redefine galactic civilization forever. The ancient warning systems of the Galactic Council, dormant for millions of years, suddenly screamed to life as they detected energy signatures that should not exist. The trial of humanity had begun, but it would be the galaxy itself that faced judgment. The emergency session convened in the deepest levels of the council station, where the most sensitive archives were stored behind quantum locks and temporal barriers. Chief Archivist Nora frantically accessed data cores that hadn't been opened in millennia, her 6 arms working in perfect coordination as she searched through records older than most civilizations. Above them, the trial chamber remained sealed with Captain Stone inside, but the situation had escalated far beyond a simple legal proceeding. The approaching human ships had triggered every defense system the Council possessed, yet none of those systems could achieve target lock. The vessels seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, making conventional weapons useless. There has to be something, Nora muttered, her chitinous fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. The Mordak Collective was ancient. Someone had to have encountered this species before. Ambassador Kalara materialized beside her, her ethereal form flickering with anxiety. The Council's priority archives have been breached. We've lost 3 security barriers in the past 10 minutes. By whom? Nora demanded, not looking up from her search. Unknown. The breach signatures don't match any known technology. Kalara's voice carried an edge of panic. Nora, whatever that human said about their species being space-capable for 12,000 years, I think he was understating the truth. A soft chime indicated success. and Nora's primary display illuminated with files marked in the highest classification levels. I found something. The predecessor archives. Her voice dropped to a whisper. These records predate the formation of the Galactic Council itself. The hologram that materialized showed beings of impossible beauty and technology. The predecessors had ruled the galaxy before most current species had even evolved, their civilization spanning millions of years before vanishing without explanation. Their final transmission began to play, translated through quantum matrices that somehow still functioned after eons of dormancy. We have made contact with a species on the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. The predecessor's voice resonated with harmonics that hurt to hear directly. They call themselves humans. We have run every simulation, calculated every possibility across 14-dimensional frameworks. The results are disturbing. Nora leaned closer, her compound eyes reflecting the ancient images. What did they discover? The recording continued. In every scenario where humanity achieves interstellar capability naturally, they become either the galaxy's greatest protectors or its ultimate destroyers. There is no middle ground. Their psychological makeup is fundamentally different from any sapient species we have encountered. They possess something we can only describe as controlled malevolence. Controlled malevolence, Kalara repeated, her form solidifying with concentration. What does that mean? They are capable of violence on a scale that defies comprehension, yet they also possess the restraint to control that capacity. This combination makes them uniquely dangerous. They can choose to be monsters or guardians, and that choice appears to be made collectively, instantaneously across their entire species. The archive shifted to show detailed scans of early human civilization. Observe their history. They wage wars that devastate entire continents, then immediately afterward create art of transcendent beauty. They develop weapons capable of destroying their planet, then use that same technology to explore space. They are a contradiction that should not be able to exist. Nora's secondary arms worked frantically to access more files. There's more. A final warning protocol. The predecessor's image flickered as the ancient recording neared its end. Should humanity ever be threatened, cornered, or judged by lesser species, they will demonstrate why we chose to withdraw from this galaxy rather than risk awakening their true nature. They are not what they appear to be. They are what becomes of a species that successfully conquers itself. The recording paused, then added with terrible finality. We have decided to initiate the Great Withdrawal. Humanity's development must proceed without interference. Should any civilization attempt to control, judge, or eliminate them, those civilizations will discover that humans remember everything their species has forgotten. Do not force them to remember. Do not make them choose. The archive went silent, leaving Nora and Kalara staring at each other in growing horror. Meanwhile, in his sealed chamber, Captain Stone sat in meditation, but the air around him had begun to shimmer with energy patterns that hurt to observe directly. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees, and frost was forming on the walls despite the chamber's environmental controls. Counselor Thex materialized through the chamber's walls, his crystalline form refracting the strange energies into prismatic patterns. Captain Stone, your ships have surrounded our station. Our defensive systems are unable to target them. What are your intentions? David opened his eyes and Thex stepped backward involuntarily. The human's pupils had become completely black, reflecting depths that seemed to extend far beyond the physical limitations of his skull. Counselor Thex, David said softly. My species has been watching this council for 3,000 years. We've observed your wars, your treaties, your failures to act against obvious evils. We've waited patiently for you to evolve beyond your current limitations. And if we haven't evolved to your satisfaction, David stood slowly, and the energy patterns around him intensified. Then we'll help you evolve, whether you want our help or not. In the archive levels, Nora had accessed the final predecessor file. The image that appeared showed not a warning, but a prophecy. When humanity finally reveals itself to galactic civilization, it will not be as supplicants seeking membership. It will be as teachers arriving to correct millennia of mistakes. The galaxy will learn to value peace not because it chooses to, but because the alternative will be demonstrated with terrifying clarity. They knew, Kalara whispered. The predecessors knew this day would come. And they fled rather than face it, Nora realized. The most advanced civilization in galactic history abandoned everything, rather than risk confronting humanity. The station shuddered as more human ships materialized from impossible geometries. Each vessel defied conventional understanding of technology, appearing to be grown rather than built, their hulls pulsing with organic patterns while their weapon systems demonstrated mastery over forces that most species considered mythical. High Arbiter Vexhi's voice echoed through the station's communication system. All personnel to emergency stations. We are declaring a council-wide alert. But in the depths of the archives, Nora had found one final message from the predecessors. This one was addressed specifically to the Galactic Council, recorded millions of years in advance with prophetic accuracy. To the civilizations that will inherit this galaxy, when the humans reveal themselves, do not judge them. Do not threaten them. Do not attempt to control them. They are not a member species seeking approval. They are the inheritors of our legacy, and they carry responsibilities you cannot comprehend. When they act, even when their actions seem extreme, remember that they see threats you cannot perceive and possibilities you cannot imagine. The message concluded with words that made Nora's multiple hearts stop beating simultaneously. They are what we were, before we learned to fear ourselves. They are what you could become if you survive their lesson. Above them, the trial chamber's walls began to crack as Captain Stone's meditation deepened. Energy signatures that registered off every known scale pulsed through the station's superstructure. The human ships had stopped approaching, but only because they had finished surrounding not just the station, but the entire star system. The galaxy was about to receive an education in why some species choose to hide their true nature, and the tuition was going to be paid in the restructuring of civilization itself. The trial chamber had become something that existed partially outside normal spacetime, its crystalline walls now showing glimpses of distant galaxies and impossible geometries. High Arbiter Vexhi's three heads moved independently as she tried to process readings that defied her species' understanding of physics. The environmental controls had failed completely, yet every being in the chamber continued to breathe comfortably in atmosphere that should no longer exist. Captain Stone stood at the center of this reality distortion, his human form somehow containing energies that made the station's sensors scream warnings about imminent dimensional collapse. Yet he appeared completely calm, as if reshaping the fundamental laws of physics was as natural as breathing. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying across dimensions. "You asked how the destruction of the Mordak Collective was possible. The answer is simpler than you imagine and more terrifying than you can comprehend." Counselor Yeth's insectoid form clicked nervously as his species' survival instincts screamed warnings. "Captain Stone, our readings indicate that you're somehow manipulating space-time itself. Such technology should be impossible." "Technology?" David smiled and reality rippled around him. "Counselor, you're still thinking like the limited civilizations you represent. What you're observing isn't technology. It's potential. Human potential. On Earth, 12,000 light-years away, something unprecedented was occurring. Dr. Rachel Kim, monitoring quantum fluctuations from her laboratory in Seoul, watched in growing amazement as every human on the planet simultaneously stopped what they were doing and turned their attention skyward. The phenomenon lasted exactly 7 seconds, but in that brief moment, the planet's electromagnetic field pulsed in perfect rhythm with an unknown source. "The readings are unprecedented," she reported to the global monitoring station. "Every human on Earth just demonstrated identical neural activity patterns. It's as if the entire species briefly became a single consciousness." The implications were staggering. Humanity had always prided itself on individualism, yet something had just triggered a collective response that transcended all cultural, linguistic, and geographical boundaries. Children playing in Tokyo had turned skyward at the exact same moment as scientists in Antarctica. 7 billion minds acting as one. Back in the council chamber, Ambassador Kalara materialized beside High Arbiter Vexhi, her ethereal form flickering with urgency. "Your Honor, I've reviewed the predecessor archives. Humanity isn't just another species that achieved interstellar travel. They're the direct inheritors of the galaxy's first civilization." The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled delegates. Several species began frantically accessing their own historical records, searching for any mention of this impossible connection. "The predecessors didn't vanish," Kalara continued, her voice growing stronger as the pieces fell into place. They evolved. They transcended. And they left their children to grow up thinking they were alone, waiting for the day those children would be ready to reclaim their inheritance. Counselor Thex's crystalline form refracted the chamber's impossible light into patterns that hurt to observe. You're suggesting that humanity are the descendants of the predecessors? That's biologically impossible. The predecessors existed millions of years before humans evolved. David turned to face the crystalline being, and when he spoke, his words carried harmonics that resonated with the same frequency as the ancient predecessor recordings. Evolution is such a limited concept, Counselor. You assume that advancement follows linear progression from primitive to complex. But what happens when a species becomes so advanced that they choose to start over? The truth struck the assembly like a physical blow. The predecessors hadn't disappeared. They had deliberately regressed, seeding their consciousness into primitive life forms on a distant world, allowing themselves to redevelop naturally while retaining the potential for their original capabilities. But why? Vexai demanded, her three heads weaving in agitation. Why would the galaxy's most advanced civilization choose such a path? Because, David replied, we learned that power without the struggle to achieve it creates beings who cannot understand limitation. The predecessors became so advanced that they lost touch with the concept of consequence. They could reshape reality at will, but they had forgotten why reality mattered. The chamber filled with sounds of understanding, from delegates whose species had long wondered about the mysterious disappearance of their galaxy's first rulers. So we chose to forget, David continued. We programmed ourselves to redevelop from the beginning, to relearn empathy, struggle, and consequence. We wanted to become worthy of the power we had inherited. And the test was today, Kalara whispered. When you were threatened with judgment, it triggered the awakening. David nodded, and as he did, the space around him began to stabilize. The Mordak Collective made the same mistake you've made. They assumed that a species' current technological display represents their full capability. They attacked human ships believing us to be primitive explorers. What actually happened in that encounter? Vexai asked, though her voice suggested she dreaded the answer. A single human pilot responding to an unprovoked attack unconsciously reached across space and time to defend himself. He didn't use weapons in any sense you understand. He simply decided that the threat should no longer exist and reality adjusted to match his intention. The silence that followed was absolute. Delegates processed the implications of unconscious power, capable of erasing civilizations from existence. The pilot didn't even know what he had done until hours later, David added. By human standards, he showed remarkable restraint. He only eliminated the immediate threat, not the entire galaxy that allowed such threats to exist. Counselor Yeth's clicking intensified. Captain Stone, if humanity possesses such capabilities, why haven't you conquered the galaxy already? Because, David replied with infinite patience, conquest was never the goal. The goal was to develop into beings worthy of preventing conquest. Every human alive carries the potential to reshape reality. But we also carry the wisdom to know that such power should only be used when absolutely necessary. High Arbiter Vexai's three heads suddenly snapped to attention as new readings flooded her neural interfaces. Captain, our long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures throughout the galaxy. How many human ships are out there? David's smile was gentle but terrifying. All of them. Every human colony ship that left Earth over the past 12,000 years has just remembered what it really was. They've been evolving, growing, becoming something that bridges the gap between biology and technology, and right now, they're all coming home. The walls of the chamber became transparent, revealing space filled with vessels that defied description. Ships that looked grown rather than built, their hulls pulsing with organic patterns while their weapon systems demonstrated mastery over forces that had been theoretical concepts just hours before. This is First Admiral Sarah Cross of the Terran Evolution Fleet, a voice announced through communication channels that bypassed all known technology. We are assuming protective positions around all inhabited systems in the galaxy. Any acts of aggression against member species will be met with immediate correction. The delegates stared in shock as the implications sank in. Humanity had just declared themselves the galaxy's protectors, whether anyone wanted their protection or not. The trial ends now, David declared. his voice carrying finality that made the chamber's reality completely stabilize. But your education has only just begun. The galaxy has operated under the assumption that might makes right for too long. That age is over. As he spoke, every species in the chamber received the same message simultaneously, transmitted directly into their consciousness. Welcome to the new galactic order. We are your teachers now. 3 weeks had passed since the trial, and the galaxy struggled to adapt to its new reality. The Galactic Council station orbited a star that now pulsed with colors that hadn't existed before humanity revealed itself. Space itself seemed more stable, more ordered, as if fundamental forces were being gently adjusted by invisible hands. Captain Stone had been released from the trial chamber, though the term release didn't adequately describe what had occurred. The chamber had simply ceased to contain him, its walls becoming permeable to his will while remaining solid to everyone else. He now served as humanity's official liaison to the galactic community, though his actual authority extended far beyond any title. The Council could comprehend. Arbiter Vexai found herself in the unprecedented position of governing a galaxy where her decisions were subject to review by beings who could rewrite the laws of physics on a whim. Her 3 heads moved restlessly as she reviewed reports flooding in from across known space. The situation reports are unsettling, she admitted to the emergency session of the Inner Council. 17 different wars ended in the past week, not through negotiation or treaty, but because the combatants simply stopped fighting. Stopped fighting how? Demanded Counselor Thex, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into nervous patterns. The weapons stopped working, Vexai replied flatly. Energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, even primitive explosives. Every implement of war in those systems simply ceased to function. The message was clear. Violence is no longer permitted. Ambassador Kalara materialized at the discussion table, her ethereal form more solid than usual, suggesting deep concentration. I've been analyzing the human ship's positions throughout the galaxy. They're not randomly distributed. Each vessel is stationed at what they term probability nexus points. Meaning what? Counselor Yeth clicked with increasing agitation. Meaning they can predict where conflicts will arise before the participants even know they're angry, Kalara explained. They're not just preventing wars. They're preventing the conditions that lead to wars. On Earth, the transition was equally dramatic but more subtle. Dr. Rachel, Kim had become the unofficial coordinator of what humans were calling the remembering. Every person on the planet was experiencing gradual awakenings of capabilities they had never known they possessed. The changes are accelerating, she reported to the Global Coordination Council. Children are demonstrating intuitive understanding of quantum mechanics. Artists are creating sculptures that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Even simple tasks like cooking are producing results that seem to manipulate matter at the molecular level. The implications were staggering. Humanity was remembering not just their technological heritage, but their fundamental relationship with reality itself. A baker in Mumbai had produced bread that could nourish people for days with a single bite. A gardener in Peru had convinced plants to grow in perfect geometric patterns. A teacher in Norway had helped her students solve mathematical problems by simply thinking about the solutions with sufficient clarity. We're becoming what we always were, Dr. Kim concluded. The question is, what do we do with it? The answer came from an unexpected source. In the depths of space, the human vessel Transcendence received a communication from a civilization that had remained hidden for millennia. The Watchers, an ancient species that had observed galactic development from outside normal space-time, finally revealed themselves. We have waited, their message began, transmitted through harmonics that resonated with consciousness itself. We have watched species rise and fall, empires expand and collapse. Civilizations achieve greatness only to destroy themselves through their inability to wield power responsibly. First Admiral Sarah Cross responded from the bridge of her impossible ship, her consciousness now capable of processing information across multiple dimensional frameworks. You've been judging us. Not judging, hoping. The predecessors were our contemporaries, beings of immense power who chose the path of voluntary limitation. When they seeded their consciousness into primitive human development, we agreed to watch over the experiment. The revelation struck the human fleet like a thunderbolt. They were not the galaxy's only ancient species. They were not even the most advanced. They were simply the only ones who had chosen to grow up again. Your species has passed the test, the Watchers continued. You have achieved transcendence while maintaining humility. You wield reality-shaping power while choosing restraint. You are what the predecessors hoped to become. But even as humanity celebrated this cosmic validation, darker forces were stirring in the galaxy's outer reaches. Species that had built their civilizations on conquest and dominance were not adapting well to the new order. The Zerani Empire, rulers of 3,000 systems, had gone completely silent after their fleet attempted to test human resolve. Captain Stone stood on the observation deck of the council station, watching stars that now seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. Behind him, Ambassador Kalara approached with news that would test humanity's newly awakened restraint. Captain, we've detected massive energy buildups in the Zerani systems, she reported. Our analysts believe they're preparing some kind of superweapon. Something designed specifically to target human vessels. David turned slowly and Kalara saw depths in his eyes that reflected the spaces between galaxies. Ambassador, the Zerani Empire has ruled through terror for 8,000 years. They've enslaved 47 species and driven 12 others to extinction. Did you think they would simply accept the end of their reign? What are you going to do? David's smile was gentle, but it carried implications that made reality itself seem fragile. I'm going to give them exactly what they're asking for. A demonstration of why some civilizations choose to evolve beyond violence, and what happens to those that don't. In the Zerani home system, Emperor Korth activated his species' ultimate weapon, a device capable of destabilizing the quantum foundations of space-time itself. It had taken centuries to build and required the life force of an entire star to power, but it could theoretically unravel the exotic matter that comprised human ships. The weapon fired, sending a wave of destructive energy across light years in seconds. It struck the human vessel Serenity with enough force to obliterate solar systems. The ship didn't even slow down. Instead, it absorbed the energy, processed it, and converted it into something unprecedented. A quantum field that reached across the galaxy and touched the consciousness of every sapient being simultaneously. For one terrible moment, every alien mind experienced what it felt like to be human. They felt the weight of responsibility that came with unlimited power. They experienced the restraint required to choose mercy over justice. They understood what it meant to be capable of ending all suffering by ending all life, and to choose instead the harder path of protecting growth. When the experience ended, the galaxy was forever changed. The Zerani Empire surrendered without firing another shot, not because they feared human retaliation, but because they finally understood what they were opposing. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy through force. They had conquered it through education, teaching by example what it meant to be truly civilized. The age of species competing through violence was over. The age of species learning to transcend their limitations had begun. And in the vast spaces between stars, the Watchers smiled and prepared to reveal themselves fully. The galaxy was finally ready for its next lesson. 1 year after the trial that changed everything, the galaxy had settled into what historians would later call the Great Peace. The Galactic Council chamber had been rebuilt, its crystalline walls now incorporating human-designed elements that seemed to exist in perfect harmony with the space around them. Representatives from over 400 species gathered in sessions that resembled philosophical discussions more than political negotiations. Captain David Stone stood before the assembly as the newly appointed first speaker for humanity. Though his actual role transcended any traditional understanding of diplomacy, the beings before him represented civilizations that had learned to measure progress not in conquered territories or accumulated resources, but in the expansion of consciousness and the refinement of wisdom. Fellow sapients, he began, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated with understanding across all translation matrices. 1 year ago, you put humanity on trial for what you perceived as an act of cosmic genocide. Today, we gather to acknowledge that the trial revealed truths none of us were prepared to confront. High Arbiter Vexhai, her 3 heads moving in perfect synchronization, responded with genuine humility. Speaker Stone, our species spent millennia believing that advancement meant accumulating power over others. Humanity has taught us that true advancement means transcending the need for such power. The chamber murmured agreement in dozens of languages. a symphony of acknowledgement from beings who had fundamentally restructured their understanding of civilization itself. The Mordak Collective's destruction was not an act of war, David continued. It was the unconscious response of a single human pilot who refused to accept that innocent exploration should be met with violence. That pilot, Marcus Webb, sits among us today. A young man in the human delegation stood briefly, his face bearing the quiet dignity of someone who had accidentally reshaped galactic politics. The assembled delegates observed him with something approaching reverence, knowing they were looking at a being who had eliminated a 10,000-year-old empire without even realizing what he was doing. Pilot Webb represents something that our species kept hidden for 12 millennia, David explained. The capacity for absolute defense coupled with the wisdom to use that capacity only when absolutely necessary. We are the children of the predecessors, but we chose to grow up slowly, to earn our inheritance through experience rather than birth. On Earth, the transformation continued at an accelerated pace. Dr. Rachel Kim, now serving as Director of Human Integration, coordinated with awakening minds across the planet as humanity rediscovered abilities that had been dormant for millions of years. The changes are stabilizing, she reported to the Global Coordination Council. We're seeing consistent patterns of development across all populations. Children are naturally learning to manipulate quantum fields. Adults are developing intuitive understanding of multidimensional mathematics. Artists are creating works that exist across multiple planes of reality. But perhaps most significantly, humanity was learning to teach. Schools across Earth had evolved into centers of consciousness expansion, where human children worked alongside young beings from hundreds of alien species. The exchange program had been established 6 months earlier, when it became clear that human educational methods could accelerate the development of any sapient species. We're not just sharing knowledge, Dr. Kim noted. We're sharing perspective, the ability to see reality as something that can be gently guided rather than brutally conquered. The results were extraordinary. A young Zelani student had learned to communicate directly with plant life, developing agriculture techniques that could feed entire systems without depleting resources. A Thralian child had discovered how to phase matter through solid barriers, opening possibilities for peaceful exploration of previously inaccessible worlds. In the council chamber, Ambassador Kalara materialized with an urgent report. Speaker Stone, we've received communication from the Outer Rim territories. 3 previously unknown civilizations have requested contact with the Council. They claim to have been monitoring galactic development for millennia, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. David smiled, an expression that somehow conveyed both anticipation and peace. The Watchers are finally ready to emerge fully. They've been testing our readiness for the next phase of galactic evolution. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. If beings as advanced as the Watchers were preparing to reveal themselves, it suggested that humanity's awakening was merely the beginning of something much larger. What next phase? Counselor Thex asked, his crystalline form refracting light into patterns of curiosity, rather than the fear that had once characterized his species' interactions. Intergalactic contact, David replied simply. This galaxy has learned to live in peace. Now we prepare to teach that peace to the broader universe. The revelation sent waves of excitement and apprehension through the assembly. They had barely adjusted to sharing their galaxy with awakened humans, and now they were being told that the entire universe was waiting for them to mature enough for contact. Are we ready for such responsibility? High Arbiter Vexai asked, her 3 heads weaving with uncertainty. That's not the right question, David responded gently. The right question is, are we committed to growing into readiness? Because ready or not, the universe has been watching our development, and our trial by fire has convinced them that this galaxy is finally prepared for its true purpose. The session concluded with the formal establishment of the Intergalactic Preparation Consortium, a cooperative effort between all member species to develop the wisdom necessary for universal citizenship. Humanity would serve as guides, but every species would contribute their unique perspectives to the collective growth process. As delegates departed to carry news of these developments to their homeworlds, David remained in the chamber, gazing out at stars that no longer seemed distant, but rather like neighbors he hadn't yet had the chance to visit. Dr. Rachel. Kim's voice reached him through quantum communication channels that spanned the galaxy instantly. David, the deep space monitors are detecting something. Massive structures moving between galaxies. The Watchers weren't exaggerating about universal civilization. David nodded, feeling the weight of cosmic responsibility settle on his shoulders like a familiar coat. Then we'd better make sure we're worthy teachers when the students arrive. In the year since humanity had revealed itself, the galaxy had learned that power without wisdom was destruction, that wisdom without power was uselessness, and that the combination of both created the foundation for true civilization. They had discovered that species didn't compete for resources, but rather collaborated to transcend the need for resources. Most importantly, they had learned that the universe was vast beyond imagination, filled with wonders that awaited those mature enough to appreciate them without trying to possess them. The trial of humanity had ended, not with a verdict, but with a graduation. The galaxy had passed its first test of cosmic citizenship. Now came the real education. Learning to be teachers rather than students, guides rather than followers, protectors of wisdom rather than accumulators of power. The ancient warning about humans had been correct in ways no one had anticipated. They were indeed dangerous, but their danger lay not in their capacity for destruction, but in their ability to force growth upon civilizations that preferred the comfort of stagnation. The price of dismissing that warning hadn't been conquest or annihilation. It had been evolution, consciousness expansion, and the terrifying responsibility of becoming worthy of the universe's trust. As Captain David Stone looked out at the stars, he smiled at the irony. Humanity had hidden their true nature to protect the galaxy from their power. In the end, it was the galaxy that had needed protection from its own limitations. The cosmos awaited, vast and patient, ready to welcome its newest gardeners to the infinite work of nurturing wisdom among the stars.